Some Trees by John Ashbery. These are amazing, each joining a neighbor, as though speech were still performance, arranging by chance. To meet as far this morning from the world as agreeing with it, you and I are suddenly what the trees try. To tell us we are, that their merely being there means something, that soon we may touch, love, explain, and glad not to have invented such comeliness, we are surrounded, a silence already filled with noises, a canvas on which emerges a chorus of smiles, a winter morning, placed in a puzzling light and moving, our days put on such reticence, these accents seem their own defense.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that.
Sure.
So I want to go to Mandana first. And the question I have, which you can go anywhere in the poem, you don't have to respond to this, but a really simple question. In what ways is this a poem that has to do with relation, interpreting that word relation any way that you want? So Mandana.
Hello. Thank you. Hi, Lainey. So good to
Hi.
talk to you. Can I, first of all, say I'm such a huge fan of Edwin Torres, and I love something you said before I joined, which was complexity is what you want it to be. And I think it suits any of the poems really in the New York School, but certainly this poem very well. One thing that actually only occurred to me this morning after a really good conversation in the forums is that, we consider the branches being the relation to each other because that's the external relation we see. But I'm sure brilliant people in ModPo have had this conversation, but I never have, that there's also the roots of the trees that are doing something else in the stillness of the ground that is more eternal, that is more lasting, but that is hidden to the eye. And I don't think I've ever really thought about what's beneath the ground when I think of some trees. I always have thought about what's above the ground. But it's for me, a great way to look at some of the poems that do feel complex, that there are many ways to approach it, as Edwin said, from the outside of the branches connecting with each other in the wind, or even in the depth of the ground where, roots of some of these ancient trees, like I think the pando goes like miles and miles and miles. The interconnections that are underneath are very deep. And to some extent, if you're looking at a queer reading of it, in terms of being able to reach out to other like folks, the sense of it being underground really, really has a lot more resonance for me. How many people and groups have underground relationships with each other, and what people only look at is the surface.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Mandana. So some aspects of relation are invisible, maybe some of the most meaningful aspects. And I was listening to you talk, I was also thinking about how we're in the fall right now. This is a time when the energy is going down into the ground. So it's good. It's a good reminder of things are happening invisibly, not just what we can see with our eyes. Knar, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was getting a little sort of preoccupied thinking about the "we are surrounded" and kind of maybe also having at the same time Creeley in my head from last week, and the darkness surrounds us, and how different these poems are, and even kind of the worldscape or something of each is just so distinct. But yeah, in the Creeley poem, it's like this kind of petrocultural surround, individualistic kind of, I think, world. Speed seems to be a value of sorts, the driving car, right? Here, there's sort of this surround, and we're told a silence already filled with noises, and then later, our days put on such reticence, these accents seem their own defense. But there's sort of this co-presence of silence and noise, of kind of reticence and flourish, and light, which I find just really beautiful and wonderful, and seems to capture some of the kind of irreducible sort of otherness that we can kind of feel when we're in a natural kind of world, or in the presence of sort of a very large, in a certain sense, sublime thing like a massive tree, and just sort of the form of like pause that can create. That's also a noisy pause. So yeah.
Wow. I'm just thinking about that word irreducible. A tree is irreducible. A poem is irreducible. Maybe a pause. Thank you. Allie.
I'm thinking about just the kind of words that are particularly pointing to language in this poem. So we get speech way up top, and this almost like longing to not need speech, as though speech were still a performance. And then we get tell later on that the trees try to tell us we are, accents, silence, and then meaning that they're merely being there means something. So meaning in a way in this poem often comes through presence as opposed to like languaged communication, which of course like kind of falls on its head since this poem's so beautifully eloquent. Yeah, I'm thinking about that, and then this sense too of silence and canvas as being like the opportunities to say whatever we want to say. And so like the possibilities for speech here and relationship through speech and the not needing of speech is just like is so active in this poem.
Wonderful. Yeah, I feel like one of the things I was thinking about was how it could be a love poem. And so this notion that you raise about just being there, you know, presence between people, but also the relationship between people and trees and what we can learn from trees. So thank you for that. Edwin, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm really fascinated by the sense of the long sentence as a root structure of sorts, like poetically the tendrils. Like he goes, arranging by chance to meet as far this morning from the world as agreeing with it, you and I. I mean, he's headed somewhere, and then we're going off in different directions before we get there. And I love that. Maybe that's a New York school sort of thing where you're going one way, and along the way there's a lot of things on the block. So you literally you're allowing the world you're in into the poem. So in this situation, how it connects with trees and the joining, the language as a joining device is a really beautiful. There's a contemplative notion to that sort of complexity, and that just happens throughout as it unfolds and unfurls throughout the poem. We're taken, and it reminds me of if we were allowed to go to the root of a tree, you know, to literally follow where the source comes from, where we travel towards, and what's bringing us there.
I want to do that. That would be awesome. But just imagining it, you're also making me think about the mycelium, right? When we think about invisibility and the largest organisms, and there's so much there.
And what's not said becomes the equal partner.